The Global Initiative for Justice, Truth, and Reconciliation is one of the coalition's flagship programs. It is a consortium of 9 organizations that together serve as a new mechanism to respond in a multidisciplinary and integrated manner to the transitional justice needs of societies emerging from conflict or periods of authoritarian rule, or that are currently in conflict. In the 6 years since the launch of this initiative, the coalition and the consortium have worked in 65 countries, fostered more than 152 grassroots projects, and engaged 510 local civil society organizations in building capacities and laying the groundwork for community-wide participation in both formal and community-based transitional justice processes. This lesson will be presented in 2 videos of approximately 8 to 10 minutes and will cover memorialization as a form of transitional justice. This first video will serve as an introduction to memorialization and the critical role that it serves in transitional justice. We will be sharing key lessons and examples and look forward to speaking with you about this material afterwards. In the interim, please feel free to contact us if you have any questions. To begin, please take a minute and think about what comes to mind when you hear the word memorialization. For many people, the first thing that they think of are solid, fixed brick and mortar memorials, museums, or perhaps some kind of sculpture or monument. However, for our purposes here, let us think about how memorialization can be defined more broadly as a process through which memory is perpetuated. In other words, the many ways we preserve the memory of individuals or historical events and collectively carry those memories with us into the future, whether as a community, region, or nation. Our work at the Global Initiative for Justice, Truth, and Reconciliation has shown us that memorialization can include many different types of projects that may take a wide array of forms, including some that may not be designed to be permanent, including exhibitions, collective action designed to promote remembrance, the publication of booklets with victims' stories, theater performances, reburial ceremonies, the preservation and contextualization of historical sites, or community art projects. Memorials and memory projects are present throughout the world, but why might they be particularly relevant in societies emerging from conflict or repressive regimes? Like many transitional justice mechanisms, memorialization has the potential to be simultaneously backward and forward-looking. It can help us look back to remembrance and reflect upon past human rights violations and loved ones who were lost, while simultaneously encouraging us to look to the present, to examine the impact of those past events in our present-day circumstances, and help us think about the collective action we would like to take as a society to prevent violence from recurring and promote a more just and peaceful future. Within the field of transitional justice, memorialization has often been considered primarily within the category of symbolic reparations that seek to publicly recognize victims and contribute to a broader process of promoting reconciliation and social cohesion. And while memorialization efforts can certainly constitute an important form of reparations in that they publicly acknowledge the harm that was done, thinking about memorialization solely as a form of symbolic reparations doesn't adequately capture its potential to provide spaces for civic engagement and truth-telling and contribute to other forms of transitional justice like non-recurrence and accountability. Let's explore some of the different ways in which memorialization can contribute to multiple transitional justice goals by focusing on non-traditional and community-based memorialization projects. The Eye That Cries is the large-scale memorial in a public park in Lima, Peru, which was designed to honor victims of violence perpetrated by the state and radical opposition groups between 1980 and 2000. The memorial also hosts annual events for families and loved ones to mourn and remember the victims. In Nepal, women from National Network of Families of the Missing and Disappeared worked together to create advocacy quilts to honor their disappeared family members and speak out against the ongoing injustice of being denied the truth about their loved one's fate. The group activity provided them with support and a sense of solidarity, while simultaneously training them in a skill, quilt making, that could help them earn a sustainable income. Think about your context. What forms of memorialization do you think are possible? Memorials can be used to help communities heal, promote civic engagement, or tell the truth about what happened in the past. However, one must also pay close attention to the intent behind their creation and the process that went into designing memorials. In some cases, memorials have been used to celebrate the perceived dominance of one group over another or promote narratives that justify violence or aim to give credibility to repressive regimes. Authoritarian regimes will often use monuments and memorials to symbolically validate one-sided or biased versions of historical events. In recent times, for example, monuments representing a violence and racist legacy have been toppled by demonstrators. In Washington, D.C., a monument of a past president responsible for forced relocation of indigenous communities in the United States was nearly removed by demonstrators in the context of Black Lives Matter protests in 2020. Other statues associated with colonial legacies were toppled or defaced in England, Belgium, Italy, and France, among other locations. Memorialization is about building a shared narrative for how a community, whether it's a small group of people or a whole nation, thinks about its past. People will, of course, have different experiences of a particular event or a conflict, and different opinions about what should be remembered and what lessons should be drawn from that history. So, what exactly goes into making the shared narrative of a memorial is nearly always debated, especially as the scale of the community that memorial is meant to address grows wider. In a divided society, if that narrative is only inclusive of one perspective or does not take into account the needs and experiences of marginalized groups, women, youth, and the elderly, who are often invisible victims of atrocity, there is a risk that, at best, the memorial could be seen as irrelevant, or at worst, the memorial could cause further division rather than reconciliation. This is why the participatory and inclusive process that go into creating memorials are in many ways just as, if not more important than any final result. Before we close this first video, let's consider some examples of memorialization that directly engaged victims' families. In Lebanon, Act for the Disappeared developed a project called Empty Chairs Waiting Families, where relatives of missing persons were invited to design and paint a chair in remembrance of their loved one, who was disappeared. And then the chairs were collectively assembled in an exhibition. In 2020, the NGO Anaket launched a memorial and virtual exhibit online, The Duty to Remember, to offer a space in which the relatives of the victims of Yahya Jammeh's regime in the Gambia could mourn, remember, and reflect. The exhibit featured photographs, testimonies from the Truth, Reconciliation, and Reparations Commissions, as well as personal objects like shoes, belts, and shirts that families of the victims of enforced disappearances and extrajudicial killings contributed in their honor. Before installing the exhibition permanently, it toured the Banjul and was on display in Geneva, Switzerland during Human Rights Week. Why might memorialization be important to your community?